to talk to you about making a delicious pie with a boxed pie crust mix. As everybody knows, in order to have a great pie, you got to have a great crust. People get really intense about crust. There's all sorts of theories about what kind of ingredients to use, techniques to use. People have got secret recipes. For people who are new to pie baking, that can be pretty intimidating, and results can be mixed and disappointing. I've made plenty of great crust from scratch, but a couple of years ago I discovered pie crust in a box, and I've never gone back. My pies are delicious, they're well loved, and they're beautiful, and I'm going to show you how to do it here today. So pie making is one of those arts where the right equipment really matters. So I'm going to show you what I've got laid out here where we're going to put our pie together. So one of the most important things of all is a pastry cloth. This is a piece of sort of a canvas-like material that you'll roll your pie crust out on with some flour in place. Really helps minimize handling of crust and make it easy to move and lift. Overhandling crust is the #1 mistake people make when baking pies. Overhandling crust causes it to be tough and not that good, so we want to minimize handling. So we've got a pastry cloth. We've also got a cheesecloth cover for a rolling pin. That's another important tool to help the pie crust from not sticking. Other tools we're going to use is a large spatula, a fork, a larger knife, a sharp knife, flour, a cookie cutter to decorate the top, white of 1 egg, which I'll talk about more in a bit, sugar in the raw, and an attractive pie plate. So let's go talk about the fruit. It's important to use fruit that tastes good. If you have dull fruit, your pie will be dull, and no amount of sugar and spices will make it any better. So I'm making a mixed fruit pie today. I like to mix fruits in unusual ways. This has blueberry, strawberry, raspberry, peach, and apple. I also like to make apple blueberry, rhubarb blueberry. Combining fruits makes for unusual and unexpected flavors that are really good. Alright, so I've cut up the fruit, put it in a bowl. Now it's time to add sugar and spices. I use the exact same combination of sugar and spices for every fruit pie that I make, and they always turn out really well. So the first thing we're going to use is about 1 cup to 1.25 cups of sugar. The more tart the fruit, the more sugar you need, but I find that a good rule of thumb is 1 cup and just a little bit more. Like that. Next, I add cinnamon, about 1 tablespoon. Then comes cloves, about 1/4 teaspoon. They're more like 1/8. And then, now it's time for a little fresh grated nutmeg. I've got this cute little grater here, and I just grate about 1/8 teaspoon into the other spices. Now we need a thickener. I've experimented with a lot of different thickeners, and I find that boxed tapioca is a good thickening agent. I use about 3 tablespoons, heaping tablespoons of that. And then I'm just going to toss in a little bit of cornstarch too for good measure. People use flour, other things, but this is a combination that works well for me. And I mix it all together. The sugar and spices are all well mixed, and I pour them over the fruit like that. And then give it a good stir so that the fruit is well coated by the sugar-spice mixture. Then we can just let this sit for a bit while we work on the crust. Now it's time to put the crust together. There's a number of different boxed pie crust mixes you can use. This is one I'm using today, which works well. I'm using more than recommended on the box. For a deep dish 2-crust pie, I'm using about a good solid 3.5 cups. So I pour that into a bowl, and then I add water. It's important that the water be cold. This is ice water, and I'm going to start with probably 5 tablespoons. I put maybe 4 in like that, and then I give it a toss. Again, remember, we're going to work on not overhandling the dough here. So we're not kneading the dough or anything like that. We're just adding water and kind of flipping it around a little bit. Add a bit more. Then get the fork out and begin to stir the water into the pie crust mix gently. So you want to get it to a point where it isn't soupy, but it begins to stick together pretty well. So as you can see, it's holding together pretty well. I'm going to put a little bit more water in there. shake. Maybe a little bit more. I'm going to use my fork to stir it around so that it's sticking together well. Now here comes the part that people find challenging. That's putting the pie crust together into a ball. You may think, oh, it's so crumbly, it's never going to hold together. But it really will. So you just kind of squeeze it together into a ball like that. Not too much handling. Using the ball to kind of pick up the rest of the dough. Compacting it is really what you're doing here. Until you get it pretty much all together into a ball like that. Here's our ball of dough. We're going to cut it in half. We're going to take one half and squeeze it, not kneading too much, into kind of a disc shape, about like that. We're going to take about a handful of flour, about like that, and rub it into our pastry cloth. All right, we've got our disc, and we're going to start rolling it out. Good firm pressure, and the idea is to roll from the center out to the edges. When I get about this far, I turn it over. Now if it cracks, don't worry about it, it'll all hold together. And then you just keep rolling. About this far along, I give it a little turn and roll it some more. You want to get it to the size of your pie plate with about an inch at least of overhang. Yeah, that's about ready right there. Rolled out, we're going to use this big spatula to gently slide underneath the crust so it'll lift easily off the pastry sheet. Then take your rolling pin and lift an edge of the crust over top like that. Then roll it up, bring it over to the pie plate, and gently drop it in. And then you can do some adjusting to fit it down into the plate. The next step is to poke some fork holes into the bottom of the crust. This gives the crust a little bit of give as it shrinks and changes shape in baking. And then put about half an egg white into the plate and brush it around using a pastry brush. This is an important step. The egg white creates a fluid-proof or fluid-resistant barrier between the juicy fruit and the pie crust, which helps keep the bottom crust flaky and not soggy. We're going to add the fruit. Sometimes when fruit sits for a bit, it can get really liquidy and juicy. I tend to pour off some of that juice to reduce how liquidy the pie is. This is fine. So then I'm going to put it into the pie plate. I'm going to shape it a little bit because it usually looks best if it's a little bit mounded in the middle. There we go. Next we're going to add a little butter to the top of the fruit. Just break it into pieces and distribute it here and there around the fruit. This adds a little depth of flavor, makes for a really nice accent to the sweet tart of the fruit. Rolling out the top crust here. So again, I'm sliding my spatula underneath the crust to separate it from the pastry cloth. And I'm going to lift the edge over the rolling pin like I did before and ease it onto the top of the pie, like that. And then you can adjust it a little bit. It's not that fragile. Okay. So now we're going to work on the edges of the crust. Some people cut off excess. I don't do that because people like a generous crust, so it may look raggedy, but don't worry about it. You've got your two pieces of crust here. You're going to roll them together around the edge of the pie, forming a seal. Rolling and rolling, turning the plate. You can kind of squeeze the crust a little bit if it has breaks. Again, try not to overhandle it, but it's pretty workable. We're just rolling it all the way around the edge. The next step is to crimp the edge. People do this in a number of different ways. Sometimes you can just take a fork and just press it in. That's an easy way to do. I do the traditional crimping where you have your hand on the inside of the pie in a V shape and your thumb on the outside. You just go around the edges, pressing the crust from the outside into the V of your fingers. This makes a nice traditional crimped pie crust edge. Go all the way around. It's looking pretty. Next, it's important to make some sort of slits in the pie crust, because if you don't vent the steam, it will cause the pie crust to be soggy with the moisture trapped between the crust and the pie. I always like to use a cookie cutter on the top. I think it looks pretty. I'm using a star today. I'm just pressing it gently down, firmly down into the pie, removing it. And then I always like to use a sharp knife to make some cuts. And finally, I always use a fork to make some fork holes. Alright, there we go. Now we're going to dress the top of the pie with the second half of our egg white. This makes for a really pretty finish, kind of a shiny golden brown finish to the pie, which makes it extra attractive. So I put that all over the pie, including around the edges. And that will make it really attractive when it comes out of the oven. The final step is to put some raw sugar on top of the pie. This bakes up nicely into kind of almost a creme brulee-like crust on the pie, which adds sweetness and a nice crunchy texture, and it just looks really pretty. So that's about the right amount right there. The final step is to put the pie in the oven. It's preheated to 375. Some people bake at 350. 375 works well in my oven, and I don't feel the need to reduce the heat at any time during the baking process. Be sure to put the pie on the middle level to prevent the crust from burning. Some people protect the crust with a crust protector or foil, but I don't really feel the need to do that. I haven't had any problems with my crust burning. So I'm going to set the timer for 50 minutes. And then I'll check at that time and see if it looks like it needs some more time. And so when the buzzer goes off, we'll pull it out and we'll have a beautiful pie. Right, our timer's gone off. The pie's ready. It looks good. Here we are. What a beautiful pie. Now it's nice to serve pie a little bit warm from the oven, but bear in mind that it'll be liquidy if you do that. It really doesn't completely firm up on the inside until it's cooled to room temperature. Lovely pie.